A word of warning, this podcast explores graphic and disturbing stories and includes some strong language. It therefore may not be suitable for our young listeners or other folks who may find it disturbing. Hello and welcome to True Crime Daily, the podcast covering high-profile and under-the-radar cases from across the country every week. I'm your host, Ana Garcia. Our cases this week: finally, justice in the murder of a hip-hop legend. 2 decades after the murder of Run DMC's Jam Master Jay, a New York jury has convicted 2 men of his murder. But first, a man down on his luck is taken in by a family in Texas and shown kindness. Police say he repaid them by taking and killing their 11-year-old daughter. Police say the man even pretended to help search for the girl. The little girl's body was found tied to a rock in a nearby river. We're recording this on Wednesday, February 28th. Our guest today is Sara Azari, a criminal trial attorney and legal host of ID's Death by Fame. Sara, welcome back. It's been a while. It's so great to have you.
Great to be with you, Ana. Looking forward to this conversation.
Absolutely. I know you've been super busy. You're everywhere. You have a podcast, you're doing commentary. You're like, every time I turn on the TV, there you are.
I'm sorry.
No, I think it's wonderful. It's what I'm trying to say is we feel privileged to be able to have you here today because you're so busy.
Thanks for having me. My honor.
Absolutely. So let's get to our first case, which is incredibly disturbing. Many of you may have heard this in the news because it made national headlines. This case is out of Livingston, Texas, where police say that a friend of the family who had a criminal record of hurting children specifically is allegedly responsible for killing the family's daughter. The victim is 11-year-old Audrey Cunningham, and the man charged with her murder is 42-year-old Don McDougal. The case made those headlines because Audrey went missing a little after her 11th birthday. I remember just having the news on, Sara, and police were asking for everyone's help because they were searching for a little girl who had not come home from school that day, as far as the parents knew. Mm-hmm. And there was an Amber Alert, and the whole community is searching for this child. Mm-hmm. And what I think is so painful for all of us to process is, one, who would ever hurt a child? This is beyond what anyone can comprehend. And then really the second part that is, I think, so painful for us to process as well is the man who's accused here is a man who was brought in by this family, who was given a second chance because the family's very religious and they felt that they should give someone down on their luck an opportunity. And instead they let the devil in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no good deed goes unpunished, right? Truly. Mm-hmm. And I think as the parents, I'm very careful not to shift blame of criminality on parents, but even though this man was not a registered sex offender, and I'm sure we'll get into that in the conversation, he still had a pretty robust rap sheet, criminal record. And I feel like if these parents knew enough about him that they were giving him a second chance, a background check or some kind of further look into his past, I think would have been really concerning. I think, he had at a minimum had an armed robbery. I mean, I don't think I would want someone like that around my children or my home. And yet I don't know if the parents knew about that or did anything to sort of, look further into his background, but that certainly was there. So the fact that he wasn't a registered sex offender, that's because he negotiated a plea, which he's entitled to do. And he avoided a registrable offense, which I do for all my clients. I try to do at least. And so that's why that wasn't there and he wasn't registering. But what about the rest of the stuff? I mean, even that stuff alone is concerning.
It's been interesting, Sara, because the family actually put out a lengthy statement, and we're going to include a part of that in a second here, because the family feels that here they are grieving the loss of their daughter. Every parent, no matter what, we all blame ourselves. Somehow it's always because we're responsible for the safety of our children. Mm-hmm. But they feel like they are really being beaten up by people on social media, blaming them for all of this. Mm-hmm. And the families pushed back saying, This is incredibly hurtful. We have lost our child. We feel horrible about this. Had we known so much about him, or as much as we know now, they would have never let him near their family.
And I also think religion plays a big part in this. You brought that up. I've had victims of crime who've been, devout Christians. I just had a case recently, and much to my surprise, they reached out to me saying they're willing to write a letter, essentially asking for mercy for my client, because my client, they understood my client's afflictions and why he did what he did. I mean, it's shocking to me, right? So there is a lot of, I don't think we can take these parents out of context either.
Right.
They were really good spiritual people who were trying to do good, and many people deserve that kindness, but clearly this guy didn't, obviously.
Yeah, and that's what's so sad here. That is what's so sad. You have a well-meaning family trying to do the right thing, and my God, it is the worst possible outcome. A little bit about the living situation in the family here. So Audrey and her parents live in a suburb right outside Houston. And the little girl was well known to the neighbors because she loved to volunteer to walk the dogs. Such a sweet child who shared to anyone who would listen that she either wanted to be a veterinarian or an animal trainer. She just loved animals. Now, Don McDougal, the man who's accused here, was a friend of the family who lived in a camper on the family's property. And apparently, like we said, the Cunninghams knew about some of his background. They apparently didn't know all of the horrible details here. So the family says that on February 15th, that Don drove Audrey to the bus stop at around 7 a.m. The family has told authorities that oftentimes that if Audrey missed the school bus, that Don would take her to school, and he was, considered a friend of the family. Obviously, you just don't let anyone take your child in a car somewhere. So, on this day, Audrey never came home from school. It was 7 p.m. when the parents finally alerted the authorities, and there was a statewide Amber Alert. Now, according to the school that Audrey attended, they said that she never arrived on the school bus that day, which means most likely she never even got on the school bus that day. And he was, by everyone's account, the last person to see Audrey alive. So it's interesting, Sarah, they did not arrest him immediately. And apparently he took part in the search for Audrey, which always drives me nuts when people do that.
Right. It's a great cover up, right? Let me try to find the body for you. It's strong circumstantial evidence when a suspect is the last person seen, with the missing person. But it's not enough. It's certainly not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And I think in this case, there was a lot more. So I think that just being the last person seen in this context was not enough, but there was a lot more there. And to your point, he had done this before. He had taken, they didn't just trust him on their property. They trusted him with Audrey. He had taken her to school before. He had picked her up before. So it wasn't unusual for him to at least appear to be doing that on this day, except it was a different day.
A very different day with a very different outcome. It actually, the search for Audrey took several days before they found her body. So what's interesting here is, I said this received a lot of media attention, especially in the Texas area. So police received a very unusual tip. It wasn't necessarily about Audrey. It was about Don, the man who drove her to the man who said he was going to drive her to school that day, to the school bus. Someone recognized Don from television, and the person who talked to police said, look, I remember him. He had a female accomplice at the time. I was attacked by him. There was some kind of a setup where they were claiming their car broken down, something like that. But I was attacked and he's the one. So it's interesting that authorities take that very seriously and actually arrest Don on this unrelated charge based on a call during the investigation, before Audrey's body is even found. Do you find that interesting that they would make an instant arrest like that?
Well, I think that they certainly had probable cause to arrest. You've got the victim of a crime saying that they were assaulted. And so that's enough to arrest him. And it is a serious violent crime. In most states, it's a strike.
Yes, absolutely. Although it didn't seem, especially if, again, he's accused, presumed innocent until proven otherwise. But it's not like when Audrey disappeared, it's not like he fled. He stayed there and continued the search.
Right. I mean, that's, as a defense attorney of almost 20 years, there's different levels of criminality. Most of my clients are regular people, normal psyches. They make a mistake. They violate the law. Sometimes there's greed. Sometimes there's other factors. But there are people who are straight up sociopaths, and they will engage in this sort of post-murderous conduct of covering up.
Wow. Well, on February 16th, investigators found Audrey's Hello Kitty backpack near a dam on Lake Livingston. It was soaking wet. And, we have to remember that at the center of this crime is an 11-year-old child who is as innocent as they get. And nothing, when I think of a Hello Kitty backpack and the innocence of it and whatever cute little dangly things she may have attached to it and her notes and, maybe her lip balm and all the little things that are in there and her pencils and the innocence and the joy of life. This is just brutal, 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 brutal. So on the same day that they find the backpack is when they arrest Don on this unrelated charge that's been called in. So about 5 days after Audrey's disappearance, on February 20th, police dive teams made the grim discovery. Audrey's body was in the Trinity River, which straddles 2 counties, and her body was tied to a rock with this rope that police believe he has a matching section of that rope. I can't even imagine. I think of her last minutes of life and the terror, and they have not said, we don't know whether she was placed in that river alive or dead. I don't know. I don't know. It's all just.
Or how much she had suffered, how much she was tortured. All we know is that it was homicide, obviously, but we don't really know the details of those, last moments before she died. And I think stronger, obviously, this is a very strong circumstantial case. It's you get a lot of convictions by circumstantial evidence. Yeah. People somehow think that it's weaker. No, it's not. And when you have this sort of totality, it's really damning because more than just the rope, if it was just the rope, I'd say, well, Home Depot rope, it could be used for different things. But we have a digital footprint here. We have cell phone data. We have video footage that places Dawn's car to the locations between the Audrey's home, the Cunningham residence, and where her body was found. I mean, that's pretty damning. So really, I host a podcast called The Presumption, which is all about the presumption of innocence. And I sort of look at cases from that lens. And I'm here to tell you, this is a pretty strong case of guilt.
Yeah. The police have said that she died of blunt force trauma to the head. It is clearly a homicide, but again, there are a lot of details that have not been released yet. And as I always say, every police department is different. Some release an incredible amount of information of what authorities call the evidence. Others, very little. It really depends on the investigating agency and the prosecutors in that case. And you want justice for everyone here. You want justice for Audrey. You want justice for the criminal, the suspect. Everyone here, justice for everyone. So I think you're right, Sarah. I think this evidence is very damning and damaging. The rope, the location, placing him through his cell phone data, all of that is very, very damaging. So finally, on February 21st, Don is charged with capital murder, and he was already being held on that assault charge. Right. So he's in custody without bond. We've talked about some of his rap sheet, but let's talk a little bit more in depth, which I think is what's so chilling here. So he had a previous conviction for a sex-related offense against a child, Sara, which you made mention of, where he was not, because of this offense, he was not listed as a sex offender, which of course is going to make everyone just lose their mind, because if the crime was against a child and it was a sexual crime, to not have the ability for the rest of us to know that, as far as building our safety nets or the safety nets that we build that we think will keep us and our family safe, it's very upsetting, Sara. It's very upsetting that he was not listed. So the case that we're all talking about, this goes back to 2007, and there was an incident at the victim's home. Right. There was a 10-year-old child involved here. The victim claims that Dawn attempted to remove her pants as the family was sleeping. She was able to get away, call her aunt to help her. But as you said, in the state of Texas, this is not something that would have fallen under that. But when I hear something like that, it undoes me.
Yeah, it's infuriating. It
just undoes me.
And I also have to say, we don't know the circumstances of Audrey's death. We don't know if she was sexually violated, if there was anything that even related to that, prior sex offense against a minor that became enticing, a lesser charge. And again, I'm not blaming the parents, but with these parents, I don't know. I mean, if they're giving this guy a chance, isn't it explainable that, you know what, I only pled to this enticing thing. I've turned my life around. That was 2007. I'm a new man. Give me a chance. I mean, I don't know. With these parents may have been, because again, it was not a sex offense that he pled to. I don't know. Would have known just by looking at his record, even if he was registering, what exactly he had done. I don't know.
And he's, according to his record, he's done just about everything. Assault, battery, theft, right? I mean, you name it, it's on there. You just look at the rap sheet. So almost a dozen offenses, either arrests or charges. So it's not like a one-time, I made a mistake. Yeah. This is a way of life. This is a way of life. So the family says, they're just being vilified here on social media while they're still trying to grieve the loss of their child. So they released a statement. Here's a part of it that addresses what everyone is saying here. And again, not putting blame anywhere here. This is what they had to say. Unfortunately, the system failed us. Due to a loophole in the sex offender registration system, Don Stephen McDougal had a history of disrespect for young female children, but it did not show up when we checked the registry before allowing him to stay in an old camper on our backyard while he tried to start a new life. Had we been aware of what we know now, this man would have never set foot on our property, much less be a part of our little girl's life. And this is attributed to Audrey's grandmother and father. It is just a tragedy, no matter how you look at it. This whole case is a tragedy. So on March 1st, Audrey will have a public memorial service. It will be held at Livingston Baptist Church, and the family has asked those attending to wear purple because that was our favorite color. Our next case is out of New York, where a jury has just convicted two men in the murder of hip-hop legend Jam Master Jay of Run DMC. Honestly, when I think of Run DMC, I think of the soundtrack of my youth, and I can't even talk about this hip-hop group without Tricky not playing in my head. I mean, it
was quite the era. I'm an old hip hop girl, so.
Yeah. And so this case was unsolved for so long, Sara. And I know that this is a case that you have looked into on your series on investigation discovery. So I know you've got a lot of insight in this. I'm just going to give the headline here, and I'm going to hand this one over to you because you've got so much knowledge on this. So the murder of Jam Master Jay, born Jason Mizell, happened back in 2002 in a Queens recording studio. This case was unsolved until recently. He was 37 years old at the time of his death. Police say that the motive was a deal gone bad, a drug deal gone bad. According to prosecutors, Jam Master Jay was apparently moving kilos of cocaine in addition, to top in the charts there. So 59-year-old Ronald Washington and 40-year-old Carl Jordan Jr. were convicted of murder Tuesday of this week. The victim knew both of them. Ronald was a childhood friend and Carl was his godson. So the crime occurred in October of 2002. So the question here, Sara, if these were people, and you can really explain this, it's not like it was just the three of them in the recording studio that day.
No, it was a full studio. That's what was mind-boggling to me, is that, well, first of all, I think that just the idea, I like, many other Americans, it's really hard to reconcile that this legend in the hip hop world that you grew up listening to became a drug dealer. Like, you just don't want to believe that. You don't want to believe the fall from fame, And then I was really upset that it has taken so long to bring this case to justice. And because there were so many eyewitnesses there, and everyone very carefully and cleverly distanced themselves from the crime scene, even though they were there. So one person was like, "Oh, something dropped on the floor. I bent down to get it, so I didn't really see." The other person's like, "Oh, I was just outside. I walked through after I heard the gunshot." So everyone had a story to tell, and I think the bigger picture or the overarching issue was that this was a time where there was a code of silence in the hip hop world. Hip hop had become gangster rap, and you had East Coast versus West Coast, and Tupac getting killed, Jam Master Jay getting killed, and no one wanted to talk. It was just a very small, incestuous circle. Nobody felt safe. Nobody wanted to come forward, and so this investigation stalled. Not really because the police department failed, but just because the witnesses weren't cooperating. And so my concern in this trial was that at best it would hang. Because even though now these witnesses were willing to come forward, they again got cold feet. So early on in the trial, the prosecutors were telling the court, "Oh, we don't know if they're going to come in. We don't know if they're going to want to, they might lie under oath. They might invoke their fifth somehow." So we're concerned. And I thought, oh my God. And you have, Anna, as you know, eyewitness accounts are weak evidence, right? And you have clouded, eroded memories over, almost 2 decades. So of course the defense got up and said, "This person doesn't know. It's too long. It's like too long ago. They've been fed by law enforcement. They're just adopting the story and the narrative in the media." And obviously the jury didn't buy it. So I was really surprised, pleasantly surprised, that there was justice in this case. And we have to remember there's a third man, Jay Bryant, who is going to go to trial. And his role was a little bit different, but nonetheless, he was there. And there's evidence, I think there's DNA evidence with respect to him. So that's another piece of all of this.
And my understanding is when the verdict was read this week that, people erupted in the courtroom because there are still factions and family and friends of the two men who've been convicted screaming, "They didn't do it. This isn't right. We're not done here."
Yeah. And Washington himself was kicking and screaming. Interesting with Washington, he wasn't just blaming the credibility of the witnesses or eyewitnesses. He was also saying, "I was one of the people that was dependent on JMJ. He was financially supporting me like many other people, even though he had no money coming in, he was bleeding money out. And like many celebrities, he was, people were dependent on him financially, including Washington. So part of Washington's defense was, why would I kill the hand that's feeding me? Well, that didn't apparently wasn't plausible either, because you got cut out of a drug deal. I mean,
that was the reason, right, Sarah? That the motivation was that these two who have been convicted were being cut out of a very profitable drug deal.
Yes, it was a man out of Baltimore. The JMJ was very close with people that he grew up in Queens. And he was always loyal to them. So when he rose to fame, he brought them in different roles. And when he was falling from fame, he was still helping these people financially. And when he got into drug trafficking, he was still dealing with those folks. So there was a friend that he had in Baltimore who was putting together a big drug deal. And what was happening was JMJ was going to sort of work on that drug deal and liquidating the drugs with Washington and Carl Jordan. And then the guy in Baltimore didn't want them as part of the deal. And so JMJ ended up, basically this tiff occurred because they were getting cut out. And so the prosecution said, this is greed and revenge, simply put. And, I'm really thrilled that, you would think of a murder case as being adjudicated in a county court, right? Why isn't this in some courthouse in Queens? Instead, it's in federal court in Brooklyn. And that's a big bonus in this case. And
why was it?
Because of the drug trafficking, it became a federal crime. Killing during the course of narcotic trafficking made it a federal offense, which, that's a whole other level of, resources, right? You've got the FBI involved, you've got more money, you got better investigation. So I think that is a large part of why, these men were finally brought to justice.
Amazing that it took this long. I also found it interesting, I read that there had been surveillance cameras, but apparently the entrance of how the two now convicted killers got in, there was an area that was not covered by surveillance cameras, further hampering this investigation.
Right, because then you had to rely on the eyewitnesses. And by the way, the receptionist in the sound studio that let those men in, because you had to get buzzed in, was like the cousin of one of these men. And when she was asked, what did you see? She was like, something dropped and I had to pick it up. So I didn't really see the actual moment of who pulled the trigger. That's how it all went down.
But the retribution, the feeling, the fear, and the retribution, this is real. And while he was a music legend, this underworld of drug dealing is a whole other operation. That is very dark. Scary, right?
Yeah, dark. And there's always, in any case where narcotic trafficking cases, especially in federal court, are brought to justice through cooperation by people lower in the hierarchy. So that's, we call them snitches, depending on who you are, you might call them snitches. So they roll on the other one and the other one. And in this case, it was a murder. So, I think it's a different environment now in that world, which is why these people were willing to come forward. I can't say it's ever safe, but I think they felt more comfortable talking about what they saw.
So Ronald and Carl each face 20 years to life sentence on this conviction, and their alleged conspirator who you've named, Jay Bryant, is set to face trial in January of 2026. That is a long way away.
I don't know what that delay is about. I don't know if there's any sort of competency issues or that's unusual.
Right.
Typically you have a trial set date within a year or so, and then you could kick that ball down the road as many times as you need to. But to have a trial date almost 2 years away from now is unusual to me. So I'm wondering what I don't know what that is. What that.
So this is one of the cases that you describe on Death by Fame. What explain to me how what the premise of Death by Fame is?
Yeah, so with respect to this case, I really invite your audience to tune in. It's the grand finale called Off the Record. It airs in a couple of weeks. And why it's important is because facts and circumstances don't always make it into evidence in a courtroom. And in this case, we didn't even have cameras because federal courthouses don't allow cameras in court. So it's really interesting to just watch and see what went down, because then you can really put this verdict into context. But Death by Fame is a very fascinating series that Investigation Discovery put out. We're in season 2. And I think the reason it's successful is because it's like the perfect marriage of Hollywood celebrity and fame with true crime. And we don't cover these sort of big headline cases that are in the zeitgeist, but we really kind of take a deep dive into the sinister side of fame, the idea that there's a price to pay for fame that people don't recognize. Not everybody becomes famous. There's rejection that leads to mental illness. It can lead to death. And sometimes that darkness is brought on just by that access that now social media gives to people that are up and coming, rising stars. And sometimes it's because that person sort of falls off the rails, right? And something happens and they go from an acting career to a career in crime. And so there's those episodes too. And so it's a really interesting series. And this season specifically, there's 8 episodes. You can catch what you missed on HBO Max. So different. We talk about James Brown, potentially could have been murdered, not died of a congestive heart failure. We talk about a graphic novelist who scalped the mother of his to-be child. Just heinous, brutal. And we talk about a Hollywood future, child actress who got drawn into a gang and got murdered, shot down. I mean, the cases are so different, but all so important because they sort of highlight, we highlight domestic violence. We highlight how reality TV is a new way for regular people to become famous, but there's dangers with that too. There's concerns with that too. So I invite all your viewers to give it a shot and tune in because I don't think you're going to want to miss an episode.
A Hollywood hopeful is a wannabe. But most people, this is a fact, don't make it big in Hollywood. Being in Hollywood is a very fragile reality.
Did you see Austin Powers? I played a little role in part 1.
I'm the executive producer, showrunner of Judging Amy, and we cast a kid. She kept saying that she had done something.
Godfather, so what's they name me?
I am the daughter of the late James Brown. After my dad passed, it just all fell apart.
My name's Jim Jeffries, I'm a comedian. I work with the guy who committed the most heinous murder in LA history.
No need to be frightened.
She was going to be the new Judge Judy.
When my evil side's ignited.
Who killed the DJ from Run DMC?
He thought he was like an Arnold Schwarzenegger.
I did not kill him. I did not want him to die.
This silver spoon neophyte Hollywood director got what he wanted.
This is as horrific as anything that Jeffrey Dahmer did. I can't believe this case didn't get more media coverage.
Hello? Hello?
When you're successful, that's a very fragile little soul.
No, I don't hide my devil inside.
Wow. Thank you, Sara. This has been great. It's been lovely to have you on the program.
Thank you. Good to be with you, Ana, again.
Sara, where can people find you, follow you on social media? Because I know you're so busy in your podcast and all that.
Yeah, sure. So on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, well, Instagram, Twitter at Azari Law, and I think YouTube it's Azari Law. And my website is azarilaw.com. And I have a podcast called The Presumption. I co-host the podcast with Alec Murdaugh's defense lawyer, those of you who followed that case, and we're on all the podcast platforms and on YouTube. So please follow me and please engage.
Wow. You are one busy woman. And you're defending people.
Got to catch up with you. Yes, I am.
Amazing. You can find me at Ana G News, Ana with one N. You can find this episode of our podcast, all our episodes, wherever you get your podcasts. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at truecrimedaily.com. Until next week, I'm your host, Ana Garcia. This is True Crime Daily, the podcast. And as we always say, don't do crime.